All right, on to our next topic. And it is a topic, and I don't often make extreme predictions. I think this is the biggest medical scandal since the unfortunate experiment at National Women's. As the rest of the world pulls back from the brink of madness in terms of the ideologically driven policies around so-called transgenderism, as puberty blockers, the use of puberty blockers to treat gender dysphoria or confusion in young people is banned all across Britain now, in many states in the United States, as the realisation is made that ideologues and extremists got hold of vulnerable young people and created a situation of absolute madness in medical treatment. Our government has its head firmly buried in the sand. We have for weeks been trying to get Matt Ducey to engage on this issue. I heard him and Megan Woods on mainstream media on Friday saying they were going to trust the experts and it was no biggie and everything was fine and there was nothing to see here. Well, there is. There is a massive medical scandal that may indeed be costing the lives and certainly destroying the futures of many young New Zealanders. And all around the world, the story is the same, except governments around the world are now listening to that story, and here we are not. So I want to lay out what the issue is, and you know how I feel sometimes about experts. But I read an article last week that made me think this is the person who can bring it all together. So I'd like to introduce you to Emeritus Professor Charlotte Paul from Otago Medical School. She joins us by phone now. Professor, welcome to the platform. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Sean.
All right. Look, before we go any further, your bona fides, what is your background? What is your interest in this issue?
So I want to say, first of all, that I don't particularly like the idea that we're just dealing with ideologues and extremists. I think that the doctors and psychologists working in this field do have good intentions, although I think they are misguided.
Right.
In relation to why should I be talking about this? I mean, it is because younger colleagues got hold of me and said, look, we're worried about this. We're seeing these kids in our practices, psychiatric practice, psychological practice, and we can't speak out because we'll be risk having our reputations damaged.
Cancelled.
So
because we'll be cancelled.
Well, that's not their word, but that's reputational damage is pretty important.
So Professor, your background is in and your expertise is in what?
Yes. So I'm a medical epidemiologist, and I think the relevant background is that I've done a lot of work on sexual and reproductive health. I've done a lot of work on the safety of medicines, and I've also had a long-term concern about research ethics and the practice of research.
All right. Thank you for that. Okay. So you are really involved because a number of younger colleagues who are practicing in the field of mental health, youth health, have come to you? Yep, and they can't speak out. And I'm retired, so I'm a free agent. I hope I'm a free agent. Okay. And for those who are new to this, and there's still people who aren't aware of it, what is the fundamental problem and who is it affecting?
So I guess sort of right back in the 1990s, there was concern about trying to treat, and this was in the Netherlands, a very small group of boys who had, I'll follow the Cass report and call it gender-related distress. So right from early childhood, they were mostly boys who identified as girls.
Yeah.
And the the doctors there knew that if the boys went through a normal puberty, it would be more difficult for them to pass as women. So if they suspended puberty and then went on to the opposite sex hormones, then they would be able to pass, and therefore their psychological health ought to be better. So they treated these children, I think it was about 40, and they had to have lifelong extreme gender dysphoria. They had to be psychologically well, and they had to have parental consent. And so that started in the Netherlands in so-called Dutch protocol. They published their main results in 2014. And actually in New Zealand, we'd already started using these puberty blockers perhaps for such children, beginning in 2011. But after 2014, the numbers took off. And so what started for a small group of mainly boys, now the people who are affected with gender-related distress, this is a real disorder. These children are very distressed. There's a big change in them. There's many, many more of them. They're now more likely to be girls than boys, born girls, and they're more likely to experience the distress with the onset of puberty rather than from early on. And actually they're more likely to have or to have coexisting autism or mental health problems.
All right.
And yes, okay. So then I probably should say that these are the you can.
Okay, so those are the trends that have happened, and it had been up until recently that I would say, and correct me when I'm wrong here, because I'm just talking as a layperson from what I've read and seen in recent years.
Yep.
So suddenly you have a massive increase in what we could broadly call gender dysphoric conditions amongst young people. Yep. The gender of it changes, and it would seem to me, and we talk about the Tavistock, we talk about Stonewall in Britain, a whole lot of organisations suddenly come up to promote this as a, if you like, a branch of treatment and also an equity issue for gender identification and for gay people. It becomes sort of a movement.
Yes, that's right. And I think that what happened was that it increased in a context in which respecting people who identify as trans became very important. And it is important, but what got left behind was the other moral consideration, which was protection of the best interests of children.
Children, okay. And how do we define children in this context, Professor?
Yeah. So there's various ways. I think CAF does it, and we'll talk about CAF in a little while, I hope, just as prepubertal. But in fact, up to the age of 16 is another definition.
Okay.
And of course, parents are guardians until the child is 18.
Okay. Once again, please forgive me if I speak in generalities because I'm not a clinician. It would appear to me that the politically correct way for such people to be treated was not necessarily based on clinical research or assessment, but a philosophy that you would medically intervene either through the use of hormones or surgeries that would remove breasts or make other changes, that was the go-to treatment rather than counselling or an assessment that didn't involve drugs or surgical intervention.
So the field has moved swiftly and ahead of the evidence. I think that would be fair to say. And I think it has been affected by the needs of trans people, and it's moved away from the norms of medical practice. So the norms of medical practice include that acting in the best interests of the patient is always first, that we're very cautious about prescribing unapproved medicines, and we can come back to that one, that we need to assess the patient's condition before prescribing, that we have to assess the capacity for a patient to give consent, and these are children, and we have responsibility to provide accurate and balanced information and say when we don't know. So I think the field, sort of oddly, but, there's always times in medicine where things get a bit out of hand, and quite often for sort of good reasons, but then it goes further.